Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Opera House Arts Coffee on the Couch with our special guest today, Rich Howe. Rich is our dear Isle neighbor and friend, and a past chair of Opera House Arts Board of Directors, among many other things. Welcome, Rich, and thank you for joining us today.
It's great to be here with all of you.
Coffee on the Couch is a storytelling program where we engage beloved members of our community in a 20-minute conversation to ask them questions, to learn more about their lives, and to bask in their stories. Thank you all for listening in. Rich, if it's okay with you, we'll begin, and Per will be keeping time, and we'll start with Esther, is it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, Rich, I was wondering if maybe you could tell us a little bit about how you spent your morning today.
Well, I started out, as I do most mornings these days, especially when it's such a beautiful day, with a nice 45-minute walk, mostly in the woods. It's a great time. Mary and I used to do it together, but she now walks with me in the afternoon on a shorter walk. But it kind of helps me put my day in order, such as these days are. But it's a great, thoughtful time and wonderful to be in the woods with an occasional animal, bird, or whatever may happen. But that's how I start my day. That was followed by a meeting, a Zoom meeting on another organization, which was followed by watching my 5th grade grandson graduate from his 5th grade, moving on to middle school, which is followed by this. So it's been a busy morning.
I'd say.
And Rich, you mentioned that your grandson had given a speech as part of the graduation ceremony.
Right.
What was the theme of that speech?
The theme was really how appreciative he was of all of his teachers for the 8 years it had taken him to get to 5th grade, because he was in 2 pre-K classes before going to kindergarten. It was a very model speech for people wanting to come to the school that he goes to, which is the Park Tudor School in Indianapolis, where both my daughter and my son-in-law teach.
Rich, you mentioned your wife, Mary. May I ask how you and Mary met?
Mary and I met when I was a junior and she was a senior in high school. And we sat next to each other in French class. And so we had known each other because we were both in band and in music and other things. But she was a senior, I was a junior. And a short while later, she invited me out on our first date. And so I don't want to get too sappy with all this, but it was love at first sight, whatever. Anyhow, we've been together ever since. And I managed to go through college in 3 years so that we would graduate together. So,
Rich, I think I first met you through singing and seeing you have wonderful, many solos. You have a stunning tenor voice. And I'm just wondering how music came to be part of your life and maybe what role it still plays in your life today.
Well, it still is a big part of my life today. And I think a lot of it was due to my mother, who was a music teacher. And I recall as a young boy, she would give, she taught in the schools, but she also would give private lessons to these beautiful high school girls. And I was really swooning over them all and the music they were singing. And so I started singing as well. But then probably after law school for many years, I didn't really sing at all. I was too busy, or thought I was too busy. I joined one group in Cleveland, an old men's glee club group called the Singers Club. I still have my Tales from, which was the costume we wore. I was able to participate in one concert, and then I just couldn't do the rehearsing. But singing has always been something I've enjoyed, and in particular since we moved to Maine.
And Rich, I know you've been involved with a number of nonprofit organizations, and that's, you know, one thing I admire about you is how civically engaged you are. I'm wondering how you first got involved as a volunteer with nonprofits, whatever nonprofit that was.
Well, as some of you may know, I was a lawyer and then an investment banker in Cleveland for 21 years, which was the bulk of my professional career. And throughout that time, and even later in Boston, but particularly in Cleveland, I was involved in not-for-profit organizations of varying kinds. Some worked with children. Probably the one that may interest you the most is there's an organization in Cleveland called the Playhouse Foundation, which manages and supervises 5 theaters with the seating capacity of Lincoln Center. These are old vaudeville theaters that were restored, and I was part of that project for the entire time I was in Cleveland on the board and working with fundraising and other things for that theater project, which is still roaring along in Cleveland.
Rich.
Well, in other organizations as well. I mean, it's been part of my life, and when we moved to Deer Isle, it's become, instead of working for businesses, it was really working for organizations. I've been on the board probably of most of the not-for-profit corporations or entities on the island at one time or another.
Rich, you mentioned your walks in the woods and Zooming with family, and I'm curious what other ways you have found solace during this time of isolation.
Well, Zooming with family is important, and we do Zoom every other day with our 2 daughters and sons-in-law and 4 grandchildren, and enjoy that very much. Fortunately, Mary and I are together. I really feel sorry for people who are widowed, who are by themselves in these times, to try to find companionship. And we're still getting along, which is good after 55 years of marriage. I think that at this point, we're outside, we can garden, we can do some things that we couldn't do a month ago or 2 months ago, for sure. But we're getting along.
I'm wondering when and how you and Mary first came to the island.
We first came to the island, I think, in maybe 1974 or 75. Our children were very young. We rented a house, which is now the Haystack winter office, which at that time was owned by a friend of ours in Cleveland, Jane Weiss, who had a gallery there called Timeless Design a long time ago. That was before Mary Nyberg bought the house and had a gallery there. Jane, we knew in Cleveland, and she said, "How would you like a cheap vacation?" And so we rented part of that house with our 2 children and just fell in love with Deer Isle. We'd fallen in love with Maine earlier because when I was in law school, after the first year, law firms didn't hire people, and we needed a job. We were very poor. Mary was teaching, and we were getting by, but just barely. And we had to have a job for the summer, so we interviewed with the Harvard Placement Office, and there were a number of jobs for couples, but the one we took ultimately was to cook for a Boston lawyer and his wife on North Haven. And that was our introduction to this part of the world. And we fell in love with it, and here we are.
Rich, have you encountered any interesting books lately in your reading?
Oh, I guess I've been reading mostly escape reading, like mysteries and so on. But I did enjoy, there's a new book on Churchill called, oh, can't remember the exact name, but something in the Vial, The Magnificent in the Vial. And it's a wonderful book on the man, on the early part of the involvement in the Second World War. I enjoyed it very much. So that's a serious book I've been reading. But other than that, it's been kind of, the stuff you can escape. I'm reading Scott Turow right now, who has a new book out, who's one of my favorite writers. I don't know how many of you know him, but unlike John Grisham, who writes a book every year, Turow writes one every 10 years. But they're books about the law and about lawyers and so on. And his books are carefully crafted, and so I recommend his new book. The Last Trial, it's called, I believe.
Okay.
Rich, what was the catalyst for you to enter into law school?
Well, it was either law school or business school. I probably figured I'd wind up somehow in business eventually. Law school had more I guess I perceived it as having more of the intellectual attraction at the time. And my scores on the law boards were good. So I didn't even take the business school boards. I just went to law school. It's like some of those crazy decisions that you make in life, which are pretty irrational, but you justify them over time and they become the right decision. But at the time they were made, it would really be difficult. And these are mostly the important decisions, like who you marry and so on is an irrational kind of decision, who you're going to spend the rest of your life with. But in our case, it's worked out very well. Same thing with law school.
If you were to go back to school now, what would you study, if anything different?
Oh, funny you should ask that question. I might go back and study music. Do what you did, right? I think I get about as much joy out of singing and participating in choirs and so on as I get out of just about anything. So it's been important in my life recently, and I do love to do it.
Rich, can you tell us about a favorite performance that you've seen in any genre?
Oh, wow. Well, there was The Last Ferryman. I do remember that one very well, which was a wonderful show. I think that in terms of recent performances, probably the last visit we made to New York, which was in, believe it or not, late February, we were so I think saw 3 operas at the Met, and I enjoyed them thoroughly, as I usually do. Maybe the best set of performances was a year ago when a friend of mine, not Mary, because she doesn't appreciate Richard Wagner as much as I do, and did the Ring Cycle, which was the second time for me at the Met, and I really enjoyed that much more even than the first time. Just a wonderful production. It's obviously 4 operas. It's a week's commitment if you do them all in a week. But yeah, but some of those, just thinking back, I remember the first time I saw Nicholas Nickleby, which some of you have probably seen, which is a wonderful show that is in 2 segments. You could either do it afternoon, night, do it a day or two apart. But this was a production that was done at the in Cleveland at Playhouse Square in the theater, professional production, and I just enjoyed it so much that I saw it twice, which is a big time commitment for me.
Rich, I'm thinking about Pear's question regarding your work with nonprofits, and I'm curious, thinking of nonprofits and volunteering for nonprofits, thinking about it in terms of reciprocity or a symbiotic relationship, what do you get out of volunteering for a nonprofit, or how does it nourish you to serve an organization in the ways that you have, if that makes sense?
Does. Makes a great deal of sense. I think one of my favorite boards I have been on was the Haystack board, where I served 2 9-year, 2 or 6 3-year terms or whatever, with a couple of years off in the middle. But it was a board composed mostly of artists or art teachers or people whose talents I respected and admired and didn't have. But discovering that I did have some talents that I could contribute to that, which were financial analysis, business kinds of ideas so it was a mutuality of learning. I remember we did, with another businessman on the board, we did sort of, not, I was going to say courses, but not courses, but we did raised funds from each other, did an experience and how you would do it and so on. And I think that artists who are artists aren't usually trained or don't understand the importance of fundraising. And it was our goal to try to train them as maybe we knew something about it, but I always felt that if I were solicited by an artist to make a gift, I would be much more likely to make that gift than if I were solicited by myself, because that's who the gift is going to, and that's the same thing is true with any of the organizations that I've been involved with. I'm on the ambulance board now. I'm not an expert in healthcare or in EMTs or any of this stuff, but I may have something to contribute on the financial side. And so I do my best and get satisfaction out of that. At the same time, I'm learning a lot about what an EMT does, what an ambulance does, and this, the same thing is true with any organization. It has to be a mutuality of learning, and you have to have a commitment to it, or it's wasting your time and you're not helping the organization.
On the topic of learning, and you have been a wonderful mentor and teacher to many people in this community. I'm wondering if you could tell us about a mentor that you've had in your life.
Well, I had several as a young lawyer, but one I remember, well, 2 actually. One who was just a brilliant antitrust lawyer, and I had an interest in antitrust, but we would discuss at length kind of the intellectual issues involved with antitrust law and monopolies and unfair competition and so on. And he had a wonderful view of many years of practice and experience and thinking about this that I really respected and appreciated, and I learned a lot from him. Another, again, on the legal side, was a gentleman who just gave me all kinds of responsibility as a young lawyer. And I could make my own mistakes and learn from them. And I always had somebody to go to, but he was a good friend as well. Unfortunately, both of these gentlemen died at a very tender age, and so I was never really to get to know them in their later years.
We have time for one more question, Rich. And what I want to ask you is for one of your earliest memories from your childhood.
Interesting. I think my earliest memory, and I believe that it's accurate, was in this house we lived in Manistee, Michigan. I probably was between 2 and 3 years old. Was my father coming home from the South Pacific after the Second World War from the Army. And I do remember him, would have been the first time I met him. So that would be my first memory.
Thank you.
70-some years ago. Right.
Wow, Rich Howe, what an incredible way to end this conversation. Thank you so, so much for spending your morning with us. I have to say, in this brave new world of Zoom meetings, this has truly been nourishing to spend this time with you via a screen. So on behalf of all of us at Opera House Arts, thank you for being here, and thank you everyone for listening.
It's my pleasure.